Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the Portland Sector Qualifier. Special thanks to Card Market for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. Getting to the basics, the event took place in Portland, USA. It gathered 478 players, which is about, I think, 24 players shy from 34 players shy from the maximum capacity, so not quite at full capacity. I'm expecting the Munich Sector Qualifier to be at full capacity or almost, so interesting. It had 12 rounds of Swiss plus a top 8, and it was organized by Star City Games, and the coverage of the event was run by the community, notably Late Night Gaming. I will put a link to this video to their coverage. I was actually supposed to cast the top 8 game. Unfortunately, I had some issues with some personal issue with my family. My little boy got sick, so I had to prioritize this over the event. And thanks to John Tada for actually taking over my portion of the casting. Moving on to the day one meta. So as you can see, this meta is quite a bit different from what we've been from Sector Qualifiers. Sabine is seeing a lot less play right off the start than what we've been seeing from the Sector Qualifiers. Boba Fett, however, still sees a lot of play. I think Han 2 sees a lot more play than what we were that we saw from the previous weeks of Planetary Qualifiers. Han Solo also saw a lot of play as well. Cad Bane was the third most represented deck. And then Grand Admiral Thrawn is having the biggest success that it ever had since the beginning of the game. Darth Vader Yellow, I think, is also a big surprise that his deck still remain very, very popular despite the circumstances. Gar Saxon is also having the biggest success it ever had, and the rest of them. And then Qi'ra, which I think only 3.4% is a very big surprise to me. I think obviously it was the best deck in the Daredevil meta, so the deck definitely hasn't seen much play. And then we see, for example, Rey Modern Scavenger, only 2.2% of the meta is the other surprise that I'm having with this meta. Rey Deadvault was also one of the big hitter of the previous meta. So we get into the more details on whether those decks were rightfully not played in this environment. But I think the big takeaway here is Han 2 really saw a tremendous amount of play in this event overall. So this is the conversion rate between day 1 and top 64 among the leaders. Obviously, this conversion rate does not take into account the different versions of the deck, but we can already learn a lot from this. So, for example, we got Quinlan did not see. So Quinlan, those are very low numbers. So the conversion rate here is not super significant because it's kind of difficult to draw conclusions from such a small sample size. So one of the biggest takeaway here is since Han 1 went from 7.8% of the meta to 18.75%. So Han 1 really did really well in terms of conversion from day 1 to top 64. So that's very impressive. Han 2, which was, as you know, the most played deck in the meta, resulting in 11.40% of the meta, ended up going at 17.18%, so also great success for Han 2. For basically both hands have done really well in this environment. We see, so if you're going into other things, was also Anakin also went from 1.9 to 4.69%, so almost doubled. Here sample size is a lot smaller, but still interesting. On the other hand, we see Sabine percentage went from 3.3% to 3.13%. So not only did Sabine did not see a lot of play compared to what we would expect, he also didn't do really well, almost halved its performances. Boba 4 also did really poorly, 8% to 3.13%. A lot of people were freaking out that Boba 4 were going to take over the meta after the Daredevil ban, because they really simply think very simple into like, okay, Boba 4 was the most played deck that didn't play 4th, and therefore if 4th gets banned, it's going to be the next in line. But it doesn't work like this, because whenever you do a ban, it has a butterfly effect, that it has impact on certain decks being played, it has a change in the environment, and there's no guarantee that your leader after this change of environment is going to be better or worse off. And this is the reason why predicting metas is very complicated, because even one card being changed is basically can have a butterfly effect that can provoke very strongly drastically change. So Boba 4 here being widely overplayed and did not perform. Boba 4 was a niche deck during the Daredevil, but it was a strong deck, but it was kind of a tier 2 deck in the Daredevil meta, and I expected the same to happen in this new environment. We're not in an environment that benefits Boba 4 anymore, and therefore its win percentage should its presence in the meta should go down significantly. Also, Thrawn 4 did underperform as well, 4.3 to 1.56%, so a big jump of Thrawn 4. And we see that Qi'ra, for example, despite representing a very small portion of the meta, actually its percentage of toxicity 4 actually increased from day 1 to day 2, so that's interesting to see. Vader 4 also, its presence in the meta increased from day 1 to top 64 as well. Gar almost doubled its market share from between day 1 and top 64. Cad Bane went up slightly, so Palpatine went up slightly, and yeah. So really, like, the big losers, the big winners are the 2 versions of Han, and the big losers are Boba 4 and Sabine, if you had to make the summary. So I just wanted to make a little specific comparison specifically for Han 1, because Han 1 progression can be very deceiving, because right now there's 2 really popular versions of Han 1 which kind of like fight against each other, and this numbers doesn't tell us which version is the best. So I did took a deeper dive into specifically Han 1. So among Han 1 deck, overall in day 1, there were 4.4% of the meta was Han 1 green, whether it was the 30 HP base or the Daredevil base, which are pretty much the same deck, but just with the one has 3 more HP and a bit more cards. So with a total of 21 of them, and a 2.7% of Blue Force. So 13 people decided to play the newer Blue Force version. The Blue Force version is definitely the newest one. It is the only truly new deck that has appeared from the ban of 4th so far. The ban of 4th has not really created new decks. It basically killed a lot of decks, like Talzin to some extent, Kylo 5 to some extent, Kylo 5 Tarkin to some extent, Quinlan almost to some extent. So it's killed a lot of decks, but it hasn't really created new decks, and it's probably one of the biggest contributions you can make to the 4th ban. But the Han 1 Blue is pretty much, Blue Force is so far the only truly new deck that has appeared from this meta. So it's still kind of a deck that is non-proven. People are still kind of tweaking. There's a lot of different options. So I can understand why there were fewer people who decided to take this deck, because it definitely is a newer deck that people kind of, maybe like there's still a lot of work to do on this archetypes to optimize it, let's put it that way. While green was already a proven formula. So 2.7% with 13 people decided to brought, and then 1% brought the yellow version. And if you look at the conversion rate of into top 64 of those decks, you will see that the green version went to 9.4% if you add once again Daredevil and so with the conversion rate just about 2.136. So they were proportionally, about the amount of green decks that have appeared in top 64 compared to day 1 has been multiplied by 2.1, once again proportionally. And then for Blue Force, you realize that we went from 2.7% to 6.3%. So here it's actually slightly better, even though there were only 4 people who managed to make top 64. Proportionally to the amount of Blue Force that they were in the event, the numbers have been increased by 2.6.25. So slightly. So it's interesting to see that when you run the numbers, you realize that the Blue Force version of Han actually performed slightly better than the green one. Obviously, sample size being small, but basically the long story short is like both versions of Han did well. It's not just, some people could assume, oh yeah, the green one did great and then the other version did poorly. No, that's not what happened. All versions of Han 1 pretty much did well, and that also includes the yellow version who managed to convert into top 64. Obviously, sample size being super small here. So yeah, Han 1 did great regardless of the version you were running. So the Blue Force is definitely a deck that we're going to keep seeing. It's a deck that has definitely proven to be a strong deck, and actually has proven to be a stronger deck than green in this specific event. Once again, sample size has to be taken into account. Moving on to the top 64, this is the breakdown of the top 64. So this time I break down by leader and base. So we got a majority of Han, Vigilant, Force. Cad Bane maintained its second spot. Han Solo, so basically the Han Solo went up, as we saw. Qi'ra still was very much there, and we saw some decks falling off. The big ones are Sabine and Boba 4. Moving on now to the top 8. So in top 8, this was a very impressive result of Han's Solo Blue Force, with 3 decks in the top 8. 1 Palpatine, 1 Anakin, so there were effectively 4 Blue Force deck, red Blue Force deck in top 8, which is pretty incredible. Even when, this is really weird because even when 4th throw was legal, I don't think we've ever had a major event that had that many Blue Force red decks in top 8. So this is kind of crazy to think that Han Blue Force is doing even better after the ban of 4th throw than before. We have the Cad Bane red, which has been doing great throughout this event. Han 1 green that has doing great in this defense, has a representant. And finally Qi'ra, Daredevil, who managed to sneak into a top 8. And just for your information, the number 9 was actually Thrawn Daredevil, with a Thrawn Daredevil deck. Moving on to now the deep dive into the list themselves, starting with, of course, with the top 8. We're starting with Bremer, who managed to make 8th position here with Qi'ra Daredevil. Qi'ra Daredevil was the most powerful, the most successful and dominant deck of set 4. So you would think that with a ban of 4th throw and kind of a meta that returns into the more of the set 4 meta, you would expect Qi'ra to come back very strongly, but this is not really what happened. And I think one of the reasons is because we're not quite in the same situation as we were in set 4. Han 2 Blue Force is still very much there, and it's a deck that with the use of Kia Dimundi can completely grind out games. And this particular meta, in this particular matchup, 4th throw doesn't really matter so much. So basically Qi'ra Green Daredevil is a very powerful deck, but it still isn't it's still a very powerful deck, but it still struggles against Han 2. As you can see here in this breakdown, he lost. So he won 1 game at Han 2, but once again, early on in rounds, in these early rounds, you are typically encountering players that are maybe not as skilled as you are, so you get to win even bad matchup. But as you get to further and further in tournament, he was actually losing he lost to Han Solo 2, and then he lost again in the top 8. So you can see, and he won pretty much against everything else. Had a really good matchup against Han Solo 1, won against 3 of them. 3 of the Han Solo 1, so that's pretty impressive. Lost to Grand Master Thrawn, which is not a surprise. Basically, Thrawn is a greedier version of Qi'ra. Basically, it's a deck, it's a leader that is able to produce a tremendous amount of value. It doesn't have the same. It's deployed on 6 and doesn't have the Qi'ra when deployed ability, so it doesn't have the same ability to stabilize against aggressive deck. So Grand Marathon is a lot worse against aggro, but it's a lot better against mid-range decks and other control decks because of the insane value engine it's able to produce with those units that dies and draw 2 cards. So getting into the list specifically, as you can see, a couple of new things going on here with the 3 copies of Night Sister Warrior making it into the deck. This allows the deck to be a little bit interactive while drawing cards. We know that this has been an issue for Qi'ra, is that Qi'ra is a deck that struggles with card advantage. It's a deck that can be outvalued by other decks. It's been a struggle for the deck since the beginning, and that's the reason why people were actually adding some Agent Callus to the deck, because you have additional card draw. So you get the Agent Callus there, you get the Pershing making a comeback, and we also have the Supremacy Tie from set 5, that has been added to the deck because it's a great pickup for Vader, especially against those space aggro decks. So the rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect. We're still respecting out control with 1 copies of restock in the main. The Palpatine's return also as well is going there for those grindy matchups. And I put also 1 cheeky copies of Traders, which I think is really powerful when your opponent don't expect it, and they might actually side out their anti-upgrades, and then they can get blown out by random traders, which I think is really powerful. The sideboard is a couple of interesting things as well, with 3 copies of Moisture Farmers, which is not a card we used to see in Qi'ra. So that's interesting to see that. I wonder in which matchup. I think this was mostly a card against Boba 4 to absorb the indirect damage and also to provide healing. I think that Qi'ra, also one of the reasons why people probably didn't bring Qi'ra is because they were afraid of Boba being too prevalent, and Boba I think do pretty well against Qi'ra, I would say. But this could really well change if Boba gets out of the picture, gets pushed out of the meta. Then Qi'ra will naturally just rise in power, in popularity. Yeah, and we also the Annihilator, of course, to deal against people who like to for the grindy matchup once again. Moving on now to Han Solo, to Alex Krez, who was running Han to Blue Force. So basically, this deck is very similar to the version that we were seeing in the previous meta with 4th Throw. It just replaced 4th Throw by other cards. Notably, it has Entrench as an emergency situation to deal with for very cheap price. It kind of performs the same job as 4th Throw when you 4th Throw yourself to deal with a very large threat early on in the game. You can play Entrench instead to stop something in space. That can be really beneficial. Open Fire also made a reappearance in the deck. I've seen also more and more people running Marine as an engine to discard your own villainy cards to fuel Anakin Skywalker. I wonder how good that is really with Anakin, but it's only a 2 of. Ogdo Bogdo, which kind of used to be some people were playing it, some people were not playing it. Now it is an automatic 3 of in every deck because we are seeing fewer Talking Town decks, which makes Ogdo Bogdo so much stronger. And then in the sideboard, we're seeing the Tranquilities in there. So very well equipped for the control matchups. Alex was. So what did he do? So he lost to Han 1. He lost to Piet very early on against a Piet Blue deck. I can see him losing. Piet Blue can be a really powerful late game. So I can see that. Then played some Boba, Kylo Ren, Cad Bane, Han. Yeah, so pretty wide variety of different decks that he faced. And lost to Anakin. Which is not necessarily a surprise because Anakin sometimes can be more like the deployments is just very impactful. So moving on now to the other person who managed to make top 8 is All Stars 97, and he was playing Han Green. So this is the good old Han Green that has been brought back from the grave. After this is probably one of the deck in the game that's benefiting the most from the 4th Throw ban, because it's a deck that was restricting himself a lot in the cards, and it was very difficult for this deck. Basically, the only way this deck could win against could play around 4th Throw is by not using Han's ability, which defeat the purpose of playing the leader in the first place. So it is pretty much reminiscent to the version of Han that we've seen. It's playing the ATLer Millennium Falcon into. It has basically 2 plans. It has the value plan of going double ramp into 7 drops with Keller and Beck, so the classic Han Green gameplay, combined with the plan of going into space, very aggressive with those Falcons and those pilots, which were playing both the Han pilots and the Chewbacca pilots to try to run and win into space. And this is this flexibility between those 2 game plans that makes this deck very powerful. With a couple of like tempo tools. So it is a tempo. It is a tempo value deck. It can play the tempo game and it can play the value game depending on the matchup. So we see the Waylays, the Bamboozle, the surprise track for the tempo play. We're seeing the U-wing reinforcements, Keller and Beck for the value plan, the tech, all that for the value plan, pretty much. Interesting to see R2D2 making an appearance. This is deck. I don't know exactly why R2 has made the cut over other options, but yeah, interesting to see that. Cool, and yeah, the rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect. As far as matchup, he lost to Kylo Ren, Data Vault, which I can see being a bad matchup. Like those control decks can be complicated, and then a Han 2, and but he did win against Iden Versio Data Vault, so that's interesting. I mean, I would say Han Green does a lot better against hard control than he does against soft control. This is definitely a deck that would suffer a lot more against soft control than it does against hard control, I would say, generally speaking. But since soft control was nowhere to be seen in this meta, there's no wonder why this deck did really well. Moving on to the last top 8, that was Troy Yamaguchi. He was playing Han Force Blue, and the deck is very similar to the one we saw before. This one is using Force Lightning instead of Open Fire as another way to discard, but is not running Marine. This is definitely more closer to what I think I would like to play if I was playing Unforced, but then the rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect. 3 copies of Shamdimula in the sideboard. I'm very much expecting Data Vault to be a thing. And he lost to Darth Vader, which is not a surprise, as the deck still suffers a little bit against space decks, I would say. But there were very few space decks in this meta, which made it very easy for Han to perform well, I think. And lost to Cad Bane. Also, Cad Bane is a difficult matchup, I would say, because it has Tarkin Town. But he did 1 against 1 doing Swiss. Moving on now to the top 4, we're getting into Drew Bergen Schneider, who was playing. This is not a American sounding name, but I mean, I guess Drew is, so that's probably a German immigrant, I would say. Anyway, Cad Tarkin Town. This is the aggressive version that we've seen, who plays a bunch of 1-drops. So this is kind of the newest version of Cad, and it's been working really, really well. The reason being is because it becomes impossible to dodge the Tarkin Town ping. So basically, in the older version, you could simply just say, I'm gonna pass, and then you have to play your 2 drops, or we both pass, and then you end up in a situation where we both passed, and you don't, especially if you play a control deck, you don't mind that. It was a very effective way to play against Cad Bane. But now with a double 1-drop opening, it's a lot more difficult, because what's gonna happen is, if you pass, the Cad Bane is gonna play a 1-drop. Then if you pass, the Cad Bane is gonna take initiative, and he's gonna end up with a 3-1 on board, and you got nothing. So he's gonna be ahead right from the beginning of the game, and he hasn't even used Tarkin Town yet. So basically, there's no way to play around it. You have to play something on turn 1, and then automatically Cad Bane very easily can just go. He's going to end up with 2 1-drops in the first turn, and he's going to defeat your unit with the Tarkin Town, ping plus Tarkin Town. And if you ever play a shielded unit, Cad Bane also has an answer for this, because he plays Criminal Monster that can actually bounce the shield. So the shielded unit on turn 1 does not even fix your problem if Cad Bane ever managed to draw the Criminal Muscle. So this is a deck that has a really, really powerful turn 1 play. Obviously, this strategy comes at a cost. You have to make the deck, in order to be able to open up double turn 1 opening consistently, you have to play a significant amount of turn 1 play, which obviously makes it so that takes up a lot of space in the deck. That means the deck doesn't top deck well. Once you get into the late game, the deck is gonna top deck those 1-drops, which is gonna make the deck very awkward in late game. And the other thing as well is, like, it actually does play. It means that you can't play all the powerful late game card like Cad Bane, so it's a very much more aggressive deck. But then, of course, the fact it's very aggro, but you get a Cad Bane that deploy on 6 is kind of awkward as well. So this is not like a strict improvement over the older version. It is definitely kind of a change of pace, but it definitely has a much better early game than the previous one, and this is what made it very successful. So it's a really, really cool deck. Cool deck, depending on what you mean, but it has probably one of the most spectacular turn 1 play in the entire game. So despite the late deploy, I think it's a really powerful deck. So here you can see it lost against Gar-Saxon. Not a surprise. Gar-Saxon is a deck that has a lot of shields, which can be an obstacle for Cad Bane to use the ping plus Tarkin Town, unless once again you find Criminal Muscle. And he lost to Yoda as well, which is interesting, because I would expect Yoda to be a pretty good matchup, but anything can happen, of course. And he lost to Anakin Skywalker in top 8. Moving on to Dylan Summer in the top 3, which is the other top 4, and this one also once again, and Blue Force. No Marine this time around. Once again, a version that is much closer to the one of Troy, which he did lose to just before top 8. And then he lost to Bobby Sapphire using Palpatine. Obviously, yeah, Palpatine does really well against mid-range deck in general, so that's not a surprise at all to see this. And as you can see here, the pretty much won all of his game up to that point, so very impressive showing overall. And yeah, the deck is pretty much what we saw earlier from Troy's deck. very similar. Going into the finalists. So the finalist of this event was running Anakin Blue Force. So Anakin Blue Force, if Han 2 Blue Force does well, Anakin also, it's a very similar deck. So I can see, I think one of the advantages that Anakin has is like, I think Anakin is really good against Han 2, Han 1, because I think the ability from the deck to get +2 attack means that there's so many cards in the deck that can just one-shot Han and prevent Han from getting from double ramp. So like Itinerant Warriors or Kiadi Mundi. So it means that the deck can be very vulnerable to just the leader deploy basically can be intercepted extremely easily. Like even Marine can one-shot Han combined with Anakin's ability. That can be very complicated for Han to manage. So the Han deployment is just very awkward. And especially the green version is like, the green version does not have many good 6 drop to play as opposed to the blue version. So if your Han gets intercepted as a Han green, then you end up in a situation where you basically can't play anything because all of your good cards are 7 drop. You wing reinforcement, Han, so that kind of thing. So it makes it this deck can really do well against Han. So it's a deck that is really powerful even now. It is a deck that really risen a lot in popularity before the 4th Thor ban, and now 4th Thor is banned. I still think this deck is definitely a really good one. See here, a very impressive showing here, only losing his first round against Boba Data Vault and losing to Bobby in the final, which is not a surprise. Palpatine is a really bad matchup. It's impressive that he managed to win against Bobby 2-1 in the Swiss. And it's actually impressive that he managed to win against Thrawn as well, because I would see this as a very bad matchup as well. But yeah, impressive showing here from Daniel Pimentel. And then finally, last but not least, we got the winners. This is the Palpatine Yellow ran by Bobby Sapphire. And Bobby Sapphire, if you know him, he's the person that is behind the K2OD team and the K2OD community. And he's decided to run Palpatine Yellow, which I think is a fantastic meta call, considering the meta that happens. There were very few Sabine, and especially there were very few Sabine who managed to make to day 2. So Palpatine is very much the same as it has always been. A really good deck against mid-range, a solid deck against control, and a really bad deck against aggro, specifically Sabine. So it's obviously the meta that we saw was extremely mid-range based, very few control, and very few aggro, and even the aggro deck that saw the most play, which was this new version of Cad Bane, is an aggro. This is an aggro deck that I think Palpatine doesn't struggle against as much, because it's a deck that plays a lot of unit with 1 health. And Palpatine Yellow specifically does a really good job at cleaning up those 1 health units using P38 and High-Speed Agent, also even playing Salacious Crumb. So the Palpatine has no difficulty killing low health units, generally speaking. So it is something that is very... and as you can see here on his showing, he did not... So he played 1 Sabine very early on, but as I said, early on in the tournament, it's okay to run into bad matchup, because usually you're going to be running against players that are a lot worse than you are. So that's fine. But then after this one, he did not face a single aggro deck. I'm just double checking here, making sure I'm not saying bullshit. Yeah, he did not face a single aggro deck. Gar Saxon is a semi-aggro, and he actually lost to it. So it's a deck that it's the same as it's always been. It is one of the greediest deck that you can play in the game. It's a deck that has very polarizing matchup, that does really, really well against mid-range, really poorly against aggro, and the meta was just absolutely perfect, with the exception of Cad Bane. I think probably this deck does well against Cad Bane for the reason I've already said. So obviously this was the perfect deck for the tournament, because as you can see on the meta breakdown, very few Sabine, a lot of mid-range, a lot of Cad, and the only aggro deck that saw significant amount of play was Cad Bane, which was just absolutely perfect for Palpatine Yellow in this environment. And Bobby is obviously a great player, and it's nice to see a player of that caliber getting a major win. So let's talk a little bit about his specific version. honestly, it's pretty classic. We threw Lothcat as being kind of a newest inclusion. It really helps against aggro. I have to say though, even though Palpatine is the greediest leader in Star Wars Unlimited, it is also the yellow version is the least greedy of them. It is the version that is the most capable of beating aggro because it has access to certain tools like McClunky is a great card against aggro in general. Lothcat, for example, is a great one too. We also see Contracted Hunter, the kind of card that can kind of push above their weights. No Good to Be Dead, P38, that kind of card. And obviously we had the big addition of set 5, the Legacy Run Sneak Attack combo, which is incredible against aggro. Because it just basically wiped the board relatively early in the game. So its version is just really solid. It's pretty much what you would expect. Still maintains a really good late game with 3 Devastator, 3 Reinforced Smallwalker, 3 Palpatine, 3 Vaders, and obviously the Emperor Palpatine deployment. So this is a really strong deck, and this is, if you may not have guessed from the thumbnail, obviously the fact that the meta is very mid-range benefits Palpatine immensely. So even though the Han decks are the poster boys of this new meta, the person in the back that is benefiting from this is Palpatine a lot. So that's really cool, and that's basically his version. I also said that he has a sideboard that is pretty much based on trying to help mostly against the against space aggro with the electromagnetic pulse, more copies of No Good to Be Dead, the Confiscate, and the Escort Frigate, and yeah. And then a couple of anti-hard control things with our Palpatine's Return Relentless. Really well built deck. Moving on, just wanted to let you know that you can pick up the Legacy Run on card market for €5.50. Yeah, let's talk about the takeaway of this event. As you can see on this meme here, Han2 seemed to benefit more from the fourth ban that it suffered from it. Obviously, this is only one tournament, and every tournament is different, so it's not because Portland shows that is going to be the case for the remaining of the season. We might see a very different meta next week in Bilbao. Anything can happen, but I would say that generally speaking, it's safe to say that Han2 seemed to have benefited more from the fourth ban that it suffered from it. And I think there's 2 major reasons for it. The first reason is that fourth was actually a very strong card against Han2 in general. And even though Han2 was playing 4th, the deck was not built to maximize the effect of 4th, as opposed to deck like Kylo 5 and especially Quinlan. Quinlan was really a deck that was built to benefit from 4th, to maximize the power of 4th. Han2 not so much. So you would argue that 4th was actually a stronger card against Han2 than it was in Han2. The second reason is obviously the fact that now one of the biggest Tarkin Town deck has been taken out of the meta. One of the big obstacles for Han2 was those Tarkin Town decks that were doing really well, that was forcing Han2 to play like a lot of unit that didn't die to Tarkin Town, that kind of thing. Now he doesn't have to worry about it as much. So this already benefits Han2 tremendously as well, the fact that he doesn't have to worry about Tarkin Town nearly as much. And I think those 2 phenomena together really benefits Han2 a lot. As expected, Han 1 is back. This is something that I think everybody who knows a little bit about Star Wars Unlimited knew this was going to happen. Han 1 was held back by Fortho tremendously. Fortho was just incredibly difficult to play around for Han 1, and now that it is banned, Han 1 is definitely back. Remains to be seen whether the green version or the blue version will end up prevailing. I think both of these decks are really powerful. Maybe Han 1 green is a little bit easier to counter, but a little bit more powerful, but a little bit easier to counter. The Han 1 blue maybe a little bit less easy to counter because it doesn't rely on specific things to work, as opposed to, like for example, Han 2 blue force is not as dependent on double ramp into 7, while Han green very much is. It doesn't depend as much on the good old Falcon into pilot, which Han green very much is. So that kind of thing can maybe help Han 2 blue in the future. We'll see. This tournament by itself is not enough. It does not provide any evidence that Han green is better than Han 2 blue force. That's what I can say. Definitely, well, obviously the decks that benefit the most from Han 1 and Han 2 being on top of the metas are what I call mid-range killers. I would name Palpatine, of course, the most obvious one. Thrawn Deadvolt is another deck that will destroy mid-range decks. Even though, so he went number 9, but even though it's a little bit less obvious, Gar ECL is another one that really did really well in this meta, and obviously Cad Bane has already been great against midrange, and he's really much benefiting from this as well. Sabine is struggling in this midrange meta. Sabine, I think Sabine is still very much a good deck, but this is a meta that is a little bit more complicated for Sabine. It's been a long time since we've been in a meta that Sabine doesn't really like. We'll see if Sabine players make changes to the deck in order to adapt to this, or if Sabine is simply just going to die off. Of course, with that being said, there's just a lot of big Sabine fans out there, which mean that even when the deck struggles, there's always people playing it. Moving on, I have a global observation about the US meta, and it's not only related to this specific meta, but just overall the US tournament. It seems to me that the top players, so the players who are the most invested in competitive play, are less adventurous with their deck choices compared to in Europe. And something I've realized, it's not a critic, it's just an observation. Like, in my videos, I always try to give a specific dedicated section where I kind of show the most kind of spicy deck, the more like kind of out of the meta deck. And here, when I looked through the top 64, I couldn't see a single new deck, a single deck that just went out of the ordinary. Maybe I missed it. If you guys have seen like something that went out of the a really kind of out of the ordinary deck that has made a performance in this event, feel free to link it to me. But I couldn't see any. And it's just something that I've seen before. If you are going to go into an European event, you will see that there's a tremendous amount of, there's a significant amount of portion of decks that made the top 64 that are decks that are completely out of the meta, and that also includes usually in top 8 as well. That's not the case at all in the US, which is very surprising. But it's, once again, it's a trend that I've seen before, so it's a little bit, it's just an interesting trend I was kind of like witnessing and observing. Moving on to my other takeaways, Qi'ra did not underperform, but was underplayed. So he didn't see many plays, but the few Qi'ra that did take part in the event actually did well. The deck had a positive conversion rate from day 1 to top 64, and there's a Qi'ra that managed to make top 8. So Qi'ra is still very much on the table, and maybe with less Boba 4 on it, the deck will actually do well. Boba struggles against Han 1 and will definitely take a backseat in this new meta. When you observe the win percentage, Boba struggled against Han 1 a lot, and that definitely is gonna make it so the deck is gonna. So I don't expect the deck to disappear completely, but it will definitely go from set 1 to set 2, so from tier 1 to tier 2, just like it was back in set 4. Meta seems unfavorable for Rey Deadavolt. So Rey Deadavolt wanted basically a meta full of Sabine and full of Boba, and since Rey is a deck that does really well against both of these decks, maybe Sabine not as obvious as for Boba, but definitely the deck was great against Boba. And with now and Rey was actually struggling against the Force decks. And now the Force decks are still very much in the meta. Han 2 and both Han 2 and Anakin are still very much in the meta. Rey doesn't like this at all. Rey doesn't like those kind of deck that can hard value her with Kia di Mundi, that kind of thing. So the meta is very unfavorable for Rey Deadavolt, and I don't expect her to be a major player in this new meta as opposed to what it was in set 4. Maybe I could be wrong, and there's loads of different wide variety of different Rey Deadavolt decks, and maybe there's some version of Rey Deadavolt that can still perform. Didn't talk at all about Kylo 5 Talking Town, but the Bothon Network team, and then some players from the Bothon Network, brought Kylo 5 Talking Town in the tournament. And obviously, without Thorthor, the deck is a lot worse. However, something that benefits Kylo 5 is that now the deck was very much out of the radar. People were kind of not expecting people to play Kylo 5 Talking Town anymore, and therefore a lot of people probably took out most of their sideboard card versus Kylo 5. A lot of deck had a couple of Agriven Parliamentarians in their sideboard to be able to deal with Kylo, and with Kylo out of the picture, people just took those cards out of the sideboard, which could definitely benefit the deck. So the performance of the decks are not so great. I mean, there's been a couple of players who did really well, but it's hard to judge because those players are really, really good players. So obviously when, and pretty much every person who brought this deck to the tournament was really good because they were both on network players. So obviously this is kind of skews the data. So I don't think the performance of Kylo Tarkintown is super encouraging this event. We'll see how it goes in the future, but the deck definitely did not impress me this event, at least on looking at the datas. Despite an environment where pretty much nobody was expecting it, the 4th ban definitely affected the deck very, very significantly. Moving on, last thing is, like, there were very few space decks being played. There was a couple of Vader Yellow. We also saw some Han 4 Tarkintown decks, but outside of those two decks, very few other, a couple of Kazudas as well, but overall, Space Aggro was not a major part of this event, and that might explain the reason why Han 2 did so well. Anyway, so that's basically it for the rundown of this event. Thank you so much congratulations to everybody who did well in the event, or at least has achieved what they wanted to do from the event, and I hope everybody had a lot of fun. I didn't follow the tournament very closely, so I'm not aware of any sort of controversy that might have happened during the event. I was very busy with this weekend with my little one being sick, and I'm obviously very excited for the Bilbao Regional Championship, which will happen this weekend, which I will be part of. So if you guys want to meet me in real life, alongside other Enigma players, Bilbao will be a great opportunity to do this. And thank you so much for following that video. If you like that kind of video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.